Hey folks, welcome back to this series of recaps from the 2024 National Open, which took place earlier this month in Las Vegas, Nevada. This is my round 5 game, and I was playing white here against another junior, Evan Yin, who's around 2032 FIDE. Of course, his USCF rating, I'm sure, was much higher. And yeah, in this game, I was coming off of 2 straight losses, so definitely a bad run for me. Starting out 1.5 out of 4 in the tournament. But of course, with 5 rounds left to go, I felt like there's still a lot of chess to be played, and so I still felt like I could have a good result. So for this game, I started with knight f3. Once again, my opponent played d5, and here I kind of wanted to play something a little bit more aggressive than the e3 poison. I didn't want like a third game of e3 poison. Honestly, I was just kind of tired of this one after having 2 games, losing the last game as well. That I played in this line. So for this game, I wanted to just play something different, maybe a little bit more aggressive. I decided to play g3 here. And my idea was basically to play some kind of Catalan, like a neo-Catalan, where I go c4 at some point, maybe b3, play like a double fianchetto. I feel like this is a little bit more challenging, and yeah, it's just fun to try something different. So knight f6, castles e6. If my opponent were to play knight to c6 here, then I could either go like c4, allowing a Benoni, or even play d4 like a reverse Grunfeld. I think is maybe objectively the best move in this position. But instead, he plays e6. So he's kind of going for like a Queen's Gambit decline setup. Probably bishop e7, knight c6 at some point. So I decided to go c4. And now black definitely has a choice. I think the most principal move would be to play d4 and take some space. And now we'd have like a reverse Benoni type of position. And there's lots of games here. And I thought this would be interesting to play like e3. And I play the King's Indian as black. I played a lot of these Benoni type of structures. So I felt like I could likely get an interesting position here. And that's all I kind of wanted from this opening. But instead he goes bishop e7. And I wasn't exactly sure what to do on this move, but I started thinking about it and I realized like if I just go d4 here, I basically get a pretty good Catalan where black is committed to c5, and this is known as like a Tarrasch kind of opening, and bishop e7 right off the bat. And so black has already kind of reduced a number of their options. This would be a very normal and theoretical position if knight c6 was played instead of bishop e7. That of course is like a mainline opening, and then d takes c4, and there's tons and tons of theory there. But this one I thought maybe is not the best move order for black. So I decided to take this moment to play d4, and black ended up castling. If c takes d4, I think white can either take back with the knight. I was probably going to take the pawn on d5, just to force black to take with something. And any way black goes, I think knight takes d5 is best, knight takes d4. I think white can maybe fight for a small advantage here, although objectively black is probably going to be able to equalize here after castles, but at least that was my idea in the game. And okay, we have a Catalan now, we have the bishop on g2, and until black fixes the problem with the c8 bishop, you know, white can always fight for advantage, right? So anyway, I was willing to go into that position. Instead, black castled, and now I take on d5, and now black has a choice. If they take with a pawn, then we have, again, the kind of a classic Tarrasch at this point. I'd probably go dc5, bishop c5, and yeah, there's a bunch of theory here. Likely I'd play knight c3, maybe queen to c2, and I was definitely happy to play this position. I was like playing against the IQP. So I was kind of half expecting that, though I think I was mainly expecting knight takes d5, which is what my opponent ended up playing. And now I go dc5 anyway. And my idea is just to trade these pawns off in the center and play with the Catalan bishop. And I thought this should be a nice version for white, because I felt like I'm getting the initiative here after queen to c2, because I hit the bishop, and we have a lot of ideas with like knight to g5, which I think are kind of annoying for black. So b6, for example, would be a move that black wants to play to get the bishop to b7, and if black could get bishop to b7, then I think black would be totally fine. But here white has knight to g5, which is a very annoying move, and black can't play knight f6 because of the diagonal, and they have to weaken their king side with a move like g6. And then let's say knight e4, bishop e7. I think white can develop the bishop to h6 now, rook e8. And this, I think this kind of position, I think white is doing really well. Knight c3, all the pieces are developing very, very quickly. Rook to d1 is coming, and we have a lot of pressure here, like takes, other knight back to c3. Bishop on h6 is really strong, some queen c3 ideas at some point. So yeah, I think white is doing reasonably well here. We got a big initiative. And so it's not that easy for black, this position already. I was thinking like queen c7, maybe threatening bishop takes f2 as a tactic. I'd probably play knight c3 in this position. And yeah, if bishop to b4, I was basically thinking bishop to d2 here, with the idea that if black trades on c3, I'll eventually not take with the pawn, but rather go rook c1. I thought this is a nice resource where I set up the pin on the c file in order to be able to win back the piece, but with a strategic advantage. And yeah, I wasn't totally sure bishop to d7. This endgame, apparently white is definitely a little bit better, but it looks like black can likely defend with best play. Although definitely white has a nice edge there. Though the engine points out even stronger move knight to g5, which of course I was looking at in lots of other lines, but I don't think I was seeing it in this exact position. And it's just kind of funny that the computer wants to leave this pin for as long as possible and then provoke g6 and then even play knight e4 here and then take this one and then get the best possible version of this endgame. So that's kind of like a possible line that could have happened. But instead we get knight d7. Maybe queen e7 was the best move according to the engine. But then a3 I would likely play, and looking for b4, bishop b2, and I think white would be definitely having a nice plus in this case. So knight to d7, and here I go knight to g5, because this is my idea, and I'm looking to provoke g6, where I could play against the kingside weakness. Instead, black played knight 5 f6, which definitely I think is the best move. It's a little bit passive, but it's better than weakening with g6 in this case. Now knight to c3. And my plan is very simple. I want to bring one of the knights to e4 and try to use the open files and get my rooks to the open files as quickly as possible. Because once again, it's like black's main problem is this diagonal. The bishop hasn't been developed from c8, and until black gets the bishop out, black is really going to be, I think, suffering in a lot of cases. And so white's just trying to develop super fast, and if I can get the rooks to the center, then there's going to be some tactics brewing very quickly. So queen c7, and at this point black is kind of threatening the move h6, because if I go knight e4, knight takes e4, I would love to be able to take with the other knight, but then I have to watch out for this tactic with bishop takes f2. So I thought a little bit about moving like king h1. I felt it's a bit too slow here. Instead I decided on queen to b3. The engine actually likes queen to b1 here with the same idea, just getting off of the pin on the c file. So on h6 I can comfortably go knight e4. And then any kind of position like this, I think white is doing really well. The bishop can come out to e3, and then the rooks come to c1, or c1 and d1. I wasn't totally sure about putting the queen on b1, but that's kind of the idea that white's looking for. I went for queen to b3, which is, I think, a more reasonable version. Now black played back, bishop to e7, and went bishop to e3. Actually, I think it was totally fine just to go ahead and go knight g4. My opponent and I were kind of playing chicken, where I was really just waiting for him to play h6 so he can spend the tempo, and then I'd bring the knight back, and definitely I'd be enjoying white's position. And he was refusing to play h6, so he didn't want to make this spend this tempo. He wanted me to just go knight e4 on my own, and so I didn't want to like lose this battle. But I probably should have just played knight e4. Because the nice thing about this move is that it controls the c5 square. I don't get hit with knight to c5, and my bishop is ready to come out anyway. Rook ac1, rook fd1, and once again, as long as black's bishop is sitting on c8, black is not solving their problems. So bishop e3, I played knight to c5. Now black is allowed to make this move, and here I went queen to c4. Queen c2 would be like the most logical move, but then after h6 I can't go back knight e4 anymore, because knight c takes e4, and once again I'm having issues on the c file, and then I have to take with the bishop, and I lose a light square bishop, and that's a big problem. Definitely I don't want to allow that. The engine actually likes this anyway, says knight f3 and white is still better, but my whole point of knight to g5 was to bring the knight to e4, so I definitely wanted to make that happen. So queen to c4. Now if h6, then I can play knight e4, because I'm the one with the pin on the c file. So funny how that works. Instead black goes knight a6, and I definitely considered the endgame here with queen takes c7, knight c7, but I also realized if I keep queens on the board, and so I end up playing queen to b5 here, Black's queen is the one that has struggles because I have more space. Again, my rooks are coming to the open files, and it's going to be harder for Black's queen to find a safer square than it is for my queen. So even though the endgame is good, I actually felt like the middle game is even better. So at this point, the engine does suggest h6, like you got to kick the knight. I'd probably go knight e4 and then takes, bishop takes to keep the pressure on b7, knight to c5. Apparently Black is actually kind of holding on here. Bishop to d7 is coming. White still has a small edge, but this was the best that Black could get. But yeah, bishop c5. Again, both of us not backing down. Black really doesn't want to play h6, and I don't want to play knight to e4. Instead, Black looks to trade off the bishops. I was fine trading off these bishops because it still leaves Black with this bad bishop on c8. Queen takes c5. And here was an interesting moment. You know, my first instinct would be to just leave the tension here, because if we trade queens, the knight comes to b5, that seems fine. So rook a c1 would be the move I'd play in a blitz game, and this was definitely my first thought over the board. And I think White is doing well here. For whatever reason, I ended up deciding to just trade queens immediately, because I also thought White is doing well in the endgame. So why not just take the endgame? After knight takes c5, I do get b4 with tempo. So this is kind of one benefit of just playing queen takes c5, is just getting on with it. And yeah, so I think White is doing well here anyway, so why not take this endgame while we can. Here if Black goes knight d7, I'd probably go rook d1, knight b6, a3, something like this. And it's hard for Black to use the d5 square. White's knights are once again coming into e4. Eventually the knight will jump into d6 and c5. The rook, of course, is really hoping to get into c7, and if that all happens, then we're going to win one pawn, the second pawn, and it'll just be a decisive advantage. So already here, I think things are very critical for Black. Knight a6 was played. I went a3, knight to c7, rook d1, rook b8, and finally getting the rook off of the diagonal. Very, very important move. Rook to c1. And here, apparently, the last chance for Black was to play bishop to d7, which looks a little loose because the knight on f6 is defending the bishop, the knight on c7 is hanging, but tactically it does seem to work out. Black manages to develop. There is this a4 square, so if White goes knight e4, for example, then Black would have bishop to a4 with tempo, kind of an important move. And yeah, by miracle, Black is not losing material here because the knight will have a chance to escape, and the bishop has gone out as well. There's a tempo on the rook. So yeah, on bishop to d7, I can also try knight ge4, but then Black could play rook d8. Here White is covering this one, but everything does seem to be defended. White is still doing well here, knight d6, b6, but again, this is kind of the best that Black could achieve, and I think White would have a lot more work here to actually convert this one. But definitely very nice position, very nice advantage for White. Black, it hasn't managed to challenge the diagonal, and all of our pieces are certainly well placed. In the game, we saw b6, and now Black actually just runs into like severe tactical problems because knight c4, and my rook's opened up, and I want to get knight to d6 in as well, and Black actually here is just facing huge issues. So knight d5 played in the game. If knight takes e4, then I probably take with the bishop here with the double attack against this one, and the knight on c7, and so Black is just losing material. And instead, after knight d5, I play knight d6, and now Black is facing some serious problems because I have multiple threats. My first threat is actually to play knight takes f7, because after rook takes f7, we can go knight takes c8, and we've won a pawn, and Black's structure is wrecked. But my second threat is also to play e4. And if White can play e4, then knight e7, rook to c7, that's also just very, very bad for Black. So, for example, a bishop to d7, which deals with a knight takes f7 threat, then I get to follow up with e4 here. Black's knight has no good squares, has to drop back to e7. Rook to c7, the rook comes in. I'm hitting not just the pawn, but I'm also threatening e5, which wins the piece. So Black is at least losing a pawn here, maybe even more. And yeah, things are really bad. Knight takes f7 can also completely, destroy Black's position very, very soon as well. So this is already looking, pretty bad for Black. The game went h6, so I just take on f7. So finally h6 is played, and this is the first moment where, the best move is not knight e4 going back, but going forward, knight takes f7. And the tactics work out for White. Rook takes f7, knight takes c8. The knight is a little funny after rook to d7, but I realized I had this move e4 in reserve, and the knight does get out. So this is what happens, e4, knight to c3. And I had anticipated this move from my opponent, and it is kind of a tricky move, because, of course, if I take the knight, then my rook on d1 is hanging, and so we end up down the exchange, and that's not good. And if rook takes d7, which feels like the most obvious move. Knight takes d7, we have rook takes c3, and if knight e2 check, okay, we can give this rook away, but then we'll have knight e7. So for example, check takes, knight e7, king moves, rook takes, and white is up 2 pawns and winning here. The rook is super active. So this is all fine for white, but rook takes d7, I wasn't sure about rook takes c8 here from black. And temporarily white is up the exchange, but I'm pretty sure I have to give it back because knight e2 check is a threat, and our rook is still hanging on d7. So there's actually no way to deal with both threats without giving back material, or at least I didn't see one. So I realized the best I could do is to give it back like this: rook c3, take on a7, then rook c1 check, bishop f1, knight takes e4. Like, I wasn't sure if I really want to allow this counterplay. If you look a little deeper, it turns out white is just completely winning here. King to g2. We're a pawn up, the bishop is ready to come out, a4, a5, and yeah, it's a winning endgame for white. Rook c2 doesn't work anyway because of bishop d3 takes, king to g1, and black's pieces end up hanging. So I didn't really want to look that far. I looked for a simpler solution, and I think I found one. So here I just played knight e7 check. And the point is I kind of save my knight, so I don't go into all these complications. If rook takes e7, then my rook on d1 isn't hanging. Rook takes c3. This was the game continuation, and white is left with an extra pawn and decisive advantage, I thought. And if black had moved the king, well, now rook takes d7. Black doesn't have rook takes c8. Doesn't have this idea. So this is a completely different story. If takes, for example, once again, we end up with an extra pawn, very active rook, strong bishop eventually as well, and yeah, nice endgame. So I thought this was a nice nuance here. Knight e7 check. There's nothing black can really do. We're just eventually ending up with an extra pawn for white. So black does take this one. I take here, e5. And from here is pretty straightforward, actually. White is a pawn up, and I'm already dominating the open file, so my pieces are better. My bishop is also very easy to activate in this position. There's a lot of nice diagonals the king can come in very, very easily. So yeah, this felt pretty straightforward to me. f3 to first cut off the knight. My opponent doesn't have a lot of moves. Bishop h3, king f7. I just bring the king in, trying to play very patiently. Do not hurry. a5, b5, knight e8. Now the rook comes in, rook c7, and bishop f5 here, threatening some checks like with bishop g6, for example, and then taking, which would win material. So black trades off one pair of rooks. I take with the rook. Pawn takes was probably fine, but I thought, let's keep the rook active. I think this is stronger. Knight f6 back. And now nice maneuver here, bishop c8, attacking the rook, forcing the rook off of either the b file or the 7th rank. If the rook moves off the b file, then I win the pawn, so rook b8. But now rook to c7 check. And if the king goes this way, then actually bishop f5 leads to a mating attack. After king h5, rook takes g7. Black's king here is gonna get mated here very, very soon. So unfortunately for black, the king has to go to the back rank. But now bishop to e6, and I'm taking on g7, so g5. I went rook f7, and now the h-pawn is a big target, rook h7. The rest of the game honestly kind of just played itself out. Rook h7 hitting everything, king f8. Now I just take this one. I think I could also play here and go for the king and pawn endgame. I think there is nothing wrong with this one as well. But I thought what I did was perfectly fine, just going for the rook and pawn endgame, but with 2 extra pawns. And yeah, the game didn't last much longer. Rook c8, rook c6, rook d8, king to d3, and black resign here as the king is coming in. I'm up 2 pawns. My rook is more active. The king is better as well, and so yeah, it's just completely over. So yeah, I felt pretty good about this one. I thought it was a reasonably well played game. Definitely not perfect. There was moments where I could have been a lot more precise, especially like in the middle game and the end game. Just bringing the knight to e4 at any moment would have been stronger, for instance. But yeah, I felt like it was a decent game to at least come back a bit in the tournament, get back to an even score, and hopefully try to improve things for the rest of the event. Well, that'll do it for this one. Thank you, folks, once again for watching, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next video. Take care.